And we're back. Good afternoon. My name's David Frise, and we're going to be talking about modern slavery this afternoon. We have Helen Carter, who's a lead consultant at Action Sustainability and is an expert in sustainable procurement. And as we've been saying this week, if you want to see modern methods of construction, you need modern methods of procurement. Helen, welcome.
Thank you.
Firstly, my apologies for the delay earlier. We technically not your fault at all. We had a bit of a hiccup, but then that's what technology does to you. You're going to do a presentation, and then we'll come back for Q&A. Just a reminder to the audience: you can either put your questions in the Q&A section or the chat box. We'll pick them up. I'll see you shortly, Helen.
Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you for the welcome. And thank you for those of you who've been patient, sitting to wait for this session. So my name is Helen Carter. I work for Action Sustainability, and I'm going to give you a very quick high level, but hopefully enough to get you interested in the subject, look at the issues of modern slavery and exploitation in construction. In case you're sort of wondering who I am, I have been working in procurement and supply chains for a very long time. I don't want to say how long, and construction particularly for the last sort of 20, 25 years, passionate about supply chains and definitely passionate about the sort of hidden impacts and things that we need to really get to grips with to start to deal with some of these issues. I work for AS as well as provide a lot of support into something called the Supply Chain Sustainability School, where I do lead on sustainable procurement and modern slavery, human rights and ethics, as long as other things. So why are we here? Why am I talking to you? Well, the first thing we need to really get to grips with is what we mean by this term modern slavery. It's been around probably since 2015, since the creation of the Modern Slavery Act, and most people tend to see it as a piece of legislation. How do I comply with the Modern Slavery Act? What do I need to do that? One of the things I think is really important that you need to understand when we start to talk about this is that this isn't about legislation. This isn't about complying with a piece of paper that tells you you've got a statement that you're doing something. This is about helping individuals. And what I always like to do when I'm doing a lot of the training courses that I run is make sure that people understand why this piece of legislation is needed. So let's hear from one in particular.
Nie zastanawiałem się nad rodzajem pracy, tylko po prostu nad pracą, nad przyszłością. Od tego momentu po dziś dzień ja cały czas przepraszam Boga. Wiesz, jak ja się czułem, a ty się czujesz jak nie wiadomo kto. Jak człowiek zapomniany, pustka, samotność. I ludzie, którzy tobą poniewierają, traktują jak psa. Bydło jest lepiej traktowane niż człowiek przez tych ludzi. Od momentu wyjazdu nie widziałem moich dzieci. Moje serce cały czas płacze. Pomaga w podejmowaniu decyzji, jeśli ja dobrze podejmuję. To są ludzie, którzy mają serce i towarzyszą mi do dnia dzisiejszego. Pomagają mi z pracą, z lekarzem. Mam jedzenie. Dzięki nim mam kontakt z rodziną. Wiem, że nic złego mi się nie stanie. Mam dom.
So what do we mean by the term modern slavery? Well, the issue of modern slavery is, or the terminology of modern slavery is quite contentious and quite hard-hitting. And fundamentally, unfortunately, there was no definition of what we mean by modern slavery. But the closest that we've seen is about the illegal exploitation of individuals for commercial gain. And this exploitation causes is in a number of forms, and I'll go through those in a moment. The reality is that what we're talking about here is the most extreme form of exploitation. Individuals who are in this situation have no choice. They have no ability to go and make choices to live on a street if they wanted to. They are controlled by either organized crime or by individuals who have lots of different methodologies for doing this, whether it's holding documentation, causing debt bondage, threats of violence to individuals or violence to individuals' families. There is no choice. These people feel they have no choice. Within the Modern Slavery Act, it defined it in a number of ways. There are actually 9 different definitions of modern slavery. Not all of these apply to us as organizations and businesses, but they're things that you may not be aware of. So forced marriage, not arranged marriage, but forced marriage is termed modern slavery under the Act. Also organ harvesting. So there's a black market of individuals being trafficked into the UK with the view of having their organs being harvested, and it happens across in other countries as well. But if we're thinking about how it affects us as an organization, as a supply chain, then actually the largest contribution to modern slavery is forced labor. It's in our supply chains. There are currently around about 40.5 or 40.3, million victims of modern slavery and exploitation across the globe. That is more people today who are being exploited than when slavery was wrongly legal. But percentage-wise, that is actually less. Be careful of the figures. If we think about the UK, though, and I know a lot of the videos that you will see, a lot of the talking will be about whether it's in international supply chains. The UK, there is a current estimate of around about 100,000 victims of exploitation currently within the UK, and that was from the Centre of Social Justice in 2020 when they released their figures. So we are not blameless and we are not clean when it comes to issues of exploitation that happen within the UK. Within that 40.3 million that we're seeing, about 26 million of those are in forced labor. So they're in our supply chains. They're in the products that we buy, the services that we have. They are really embedded into anything that we consume on a daily basis. And in fact, if you ever do get a chance, go onto something called slaveryfootprint.org and calculate how much you're consuming and how much of that potentially will have slavery included within the supply chain. It is pretty much well understood that you cannot get up in the morning and go to bed as individuals without contributing somewhere within the supply chain to exploitation of individuals. And there's a huge range of industries that we'll see on a regular basis. If we think about construction, that's sort of 26 million, 18% of that is the construction industry. So whilst you will be looking at your own sites, your own businesses, maybe some of your labor providers, there is a lot more embedded in a lot of the materials that you purchase, and that then starts to go into that international supply chain. So it's pretty pandemic, if you want to use a word, or epidemic in terms of the way our supply chains operate. If we start to think about some of those trades that are particularly vulnerable, and as I mentioned, it's in pretty much anything and everything we consume on a daily basis, you'll see why. So agriculture has had the problem for a considerably long period of time, and organisations like Stronger Together, organisations like the Gangmasters Labour Abuse Authority have been around to try and deal particularly with the agriculture sector because of the transient nature, because of the seasonal nature, if you like, of what we purchase on a regular basis. And that's internationally. You'll find it in your tomatoes, at the risk of sounding really middle class, your avocados, your strawberries, your fish, your shrimps. It's across the whole spectrum in terms of our food supply chain. If you have lots of smart tech, if you've got the latest phones, the latest laptops, they probably will have some contribution to things like conflict minerals. And they are found in places like the Congo, where fundamentally the mines are controlled and owned by guerrillas. And I don't mean the fluffy kind, I mean the soldiers who are responsible for kidnapping lots of children, using them in the mine and trading them up as child soldiers. We see it in other industries like bricks, lots of component materials like bricks, like sandstone, like lime, quarry materials. And in fact, interestingly, the bricks is a great example of where we start to see the sort of correlation between other sustainability impacts like climate change, which have forced farmers off their lands, creating a huge amount of debt, which is then bought by kiln owners in places like South Asia, who then force them to work that debt off. And when they die, because the conditions are so horrendous, that debt passes to the offspring. And whilst I know a lot of individuals will think, oh, that's just another country, it's not our supply chain. Think about what's going on in the pandemic at the moment. Think about the supply chain challenges you're having, and think about the fact that if you're so desperate to get things, you don't ask the question. You don't care where they come from. There's been a 300% increase in bricks being exported from South Asia into Europe over the last 2 years. So supply chain decisions have a massive ripple effect when we start to think about where the component parts and raw materials come from. If we also then think about other industries like the sweatshops, you'll be familiar with them. And in fact, in the pandemic, we saw Boohoo. If any of you have daughters, you might be familiar with that brand. But thinking about the labour conditions that were going on in Leicester, and in fact, Leicester itself is under a microscope at the moment for a lot of the labour conditions that are working in a lot of the fashion outlets at this present moment in time. So again, it isn't just China, India, the places that we think it exists. It's in the UK too. We also look at things like domestic servitude. Again, some of the biggest cases we've seen have had people being trafficked into the UK to be used as domestic servants. And in fact, a month ago, there was a gentleman and his son basically arrested for keeping an individual in a shed for 50 years. I'm not joking you, 50, a considerably long period of time. And he was basically their house slave, and he was living in a shed since he was 16 years old. He was eventually saved, but had spent his entire lifetime working as a domestic servant, if you like, for this family. Starting to think about things like nail bars. So if any of you gentlemen are going to get your nails done, think about the nail bars, particularly prolific for Asians being trafficked into the UK. And in my hometown in the Midlands, where I live in Stafford, we've seen cases of this going around the West Midlands side of things, and have seen one of the first prosecutions in my hometown in Stafford court on this. So again, beauty bars, be aware of them. Car washes are the other one. If you are paying less than £5 to have your car washed, and I'm talking about the ones that pop up on the streets, I'm not talking about paying your children pocket money, then it is almost 100% guaranteed that you are contributing to exploitation. And in fact, again, one of the biggest prosecutions in this area was a car wash down in Milton Keynes. I think it was a converted gas station where they found victims who'd been trafficked in and were being exploited, guns, drugs, money laundering. And that's one of the issues you've got to think about when it comes to exploitation, is that there will be connected criminality associated with it. They don't care how much money they make and whatever way they make it. Criminal gangs will just make sure that they can get as much as possible. So exploitation might not be the only crime you're exposing yourself to if you're not thinking about how these individuals are coming to you and being paid, etc. And then construction. And when I started looking into this, probably back in 2014, everyone said construction's fine, we don't have this problem. It's all those dodgy deals where people get their drives tarmacked with the old brown envelopes that happen. And in fact, actually, one of the biggest cases so far was the Rooney family. I don't mean the footballing lot, but a travelling family who were responsible for picking homeless off the street and then basically abusing them and torturing them, but using them as well on drives and tarmacking jobs. They got a total of 50 years in prison, the four of them did, for the crimes that they committed. But we are seeing it prolifically now across other industries. I've seen personally examples that people have spoken to me about security guards, about just general handymen on site. I've seen it on tier ones, I've seen it in tier twos. Our industry has issues with exploitation more prominently than we actually realise. So why do we need to worry about this apart from the fact that it's inherently wrong? Well, the legislation's doing something really interesting, and the legislation's also pushing us in this space around due diligence. What we've started to see is an influx of civil cases now. So the first civil case we saw was on the cobalt mines, where a lot of the tech companies were sued by people that were losing their children to the mines. We've seen this in my other area. I bake, so I was very upset about the chocolate because I tried to ethically source my chocolate, but we've seen it in the chocolate supply chains where children are being used. But one of the ones that's really bringing it home in the UK was BESA. BESA are currently going through legal processes and are being sued by victims who were trafficked into the UK, and they were part of the biggest operational case in the UK called Operation Fort, where 400 individuals were trafficked from Poland and were used and infiltrated into various supply chains. And let's be clear about this, BESA had some good systems in place, but some things fell through the crack. So be aware that the due diligence is so important, because this is what's going to be the case more and more if we start to see more victims coming through the systems. So if we understand what we mean by exploitation, I'll go through due diligence in a moment, but one of the main things you can do when it comes to your organization is make sure that everybody in your business knows what to look for. That possibly could be the breakdown in the BESA system. It isn't about just checking passports. It isn't about just checking documentation or right to work checks. All of those things are really, really important. But you also need to use your eyes and use your ears and have more communication. And where you might be working on sites where there are other people starting to take an interest in the ones that you're working with. And this ties in quite nicely with the mental health. But if you've got individuals who are coming to sites that you're working in or are coming to your organization, who may that be for a short period of time, they may be withdrawn, they may show signs of physical abuse, they may be transported to site or transported to your organization in a nondescript van. I'm not going to just say white van, but nondescript. They won't necessarily have the best hygiene because they'll be living in cramped conditions. They might come in the same clothes. They may not be able to speak English, and that doesn't always mean that they're not because they're foreign. But it is also because fundamentally they are vulnerable individuals, so they may not have very good communication skills. So think about those sorts of softer signs and communicate those, and make sure that all your staff and people you're working with on site are aware of this. And then importantly, understand what to do if you do have any suspicions. So understanding how you find somebody, and there is this need that we have as individuals to go and help. That isn't always the case. It isn't about taking them home and telling them it'll be okay, but it's not about ignoring it either. It's about getting people help. So make sure when you are working with individuals that you feel may be victims of exploitation, that you are contacting individuals like the police, like the Gangmasters Labour Abuse Authority, like Modern Slavery Helpline, so that they can bring in the relevant people to help these individuals, and they do in a very managed way. But also, if they come to you, think about how you manage those, keep them separate, start to think about those softer sides of warmth, clothing, food, the things that you need. So one of the final things that I'll go through, as I said, is due diligence. So what you need from a due diligence perspective complements that softer skills. So it's a two-pronged attack that you're looking for around how to deal with this. And I will put this caveat in. This is not because of you've got small businesses. If you're a small business, you still need to think about due diligence. The legislation applies to everybody. The only thing that doesn't is the £36 million threshold for a statement. So every organisation needs to ensure that you've got good due diligence in place. And what is important to understand is that due diligence isn't about saying that you have no slaves. It's about making sure you're taking steps to not commit offence, or that you're identifying opportunities to prevent and mitigate instances of slavery in your operations and your supply chain. A great analogy I've heard is find and fix from Marshalls. That's what you're doing. You're trying to locate it, and where you find it, put it right. It is not about ever declaring that you have 0 slaves in your organization and 0 slaves in your supply chain. That is an impossible statement to be able to validate and prove. So showing that you're looking is really, really important. So very quickly, before I then finish with a little video and allow you to have some Q&As, what you need in a really good due diligence system is to start thinking about accountability. Who is responsible for this? And obviously, like any change that you'll have gone through with things like your modern methods of construction, carbon, sustainability, it needs to be accountable at the highest level. There may be some tough decisions to make, and there is some reputational risk here that could be involved if you've ended up having individuals working for your organization. Training is important. I've literally whistle-stopped through what you need to think about. I don't recommend doing that as the training, but at least making sure that you've got the right training in place for your procurement teams, for your site teams, for your senior leaders, making sure everybody understands what it is and why it's important. Working with stakeholders, working with peer organizations, competitors. This is a space where people do not want to compete. It is not a competitive advantage to be better at identifying exploitation than others. So think about areas where you can work collectively. And in fact, after lunch, I'm working on a roundtable on how we deal with solar panels and the issue with the Uyghurs in China. And that's a collaborative event, how we start to think about this working together. Make sure that you've got opportunities to understand how you help victims through remediation and report this, and everyone's clear on those. Undertake your risk assessment to make sure that you understand where your risks sit, where your leverage is, what you can do and do better, and then bring your supply chain with you. You're part of a supply chain, so you should be having conversations with your clients on this one, but they need to understand your supply chain too. So start talking to your supply chain about this. And it's not about setting standards at this stage. It's about just starting that conversation and understanding who is doing what, although there are some standards that you can comply with. And then with any good management system and any good due diligence system, it's always useful to measure and report what's working well. Although I do recommend strongly avoiding how many victims that you saved. It's not about that. Otherwise, that becomes a bit of a race to the bottom. It's about making sure that you're measuring that real impact, that you're starting to get deeper into your supply chain and you can evidence transparency, which is fundamentally what you're trying to do. So one of the things that's important to understand is that exploitation is everywhere. It's everywhere in our supply chain. Anyone who says they have no slaves in their supply chain has not looked or has looked and decided to ignore. And in our supply chain and construction, we are so risk averse. We are so good at risk dumping. We are so good at telling everybody else it's their problem. We really do need to open up every tier of the supply chain and make them realize that they have a part to play in being able to do the necessary actions to identify and tackle exploitation through our industry. So I'll leave you with this very quick video and then I will leave it open to Q&A.
Think about your construction project. Countless people are working on it, and you're making important decisions, big and small. But if you drill down into the detail, modern slavery hides in the most unexpected places. A door hinge. This is Li Wei, and he makes small metal parts in a factory in China. He works 12 hours a day and hasn't been paid in 6 months. These stone sets. Sunita is 11 and works in a quarry in India. It's all she knows. She's part of a supply chain she can't even see. Your LED lighting system. Emmanuel was kidnapped and forced to mine rare metals in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He'll never see his family again, but those rare metals are used in your LEDs. The workers on your site. Andre comes from Albania. Dave's from the UK. They are both victims of forced labor. They're cold and hungry, but they keep working because their controllers know where their wives and kids live. Modern slavery hurts people all over the world, and it can demolish company reputations. But you have the power to change things. Now you can see all the people in your project. Take a long, hard look at your supply chains. Are you delivering projects you can be proud of? Start today. Go to www.ethicalsourcing.co.uk to find out what you can do next.
So hopefully I've given you a little something to think about while you're munching your sandwiches over lunch. Thank you for your time, yeah, any questions I'm happy to answer.
Great. Thank you, Helen. That was very thought-provoking, as they say. We've got a short time for questions. So, as a contractor member, where do I start? It's a big topic, and it's probably not top of my list of things I think I've got to consider. But where should I start on this?
I always advocate that before you can talk to a supply chain, you have to get your own house in order. So what I would be looking at initially is your own approach to recruitment, to the way that you get people in, to make sure that you've got all the right checks and balances, the right legal compliance. I am assured, and I'm probably assured, I'm very confident that most of you guys are doing the internal recruitment very well. So therefore, the next stage is to think about what you're bringing into the business. And one of the really good things that the legislation allows you to do and due diligence allows you to do is to take a risk-based approach. So it is to focus on areas where your business has a genuine risk. So if you are an organization that are not employing anybody through temporary labor, then I wouldn't worry about temporary labor. I wouldn't look at that. But if I was an organization where I was providing, tiles or a product that we know the supply chain is going to start looking at, our client is going to start looking at, then I would start focusing on asking questions of my supply chain on what they're doing in this area. And it's not a compliance-based piece, it's that conversation. Do you know about it? Are you aware of it? What are you doing to start understanding what's going on in your supply chain so that we can bring those links in? So I would suggest making sure that everything you're doing yourself is legal. It's a good place to start. If you're then bringing in temporary labor, that's probably one of your biggest, highest reputational risks. If you're then looking at subcontractors, probably another risk for you, but again, linked to labor, and then finally starting to look at materials. So the risk is really important. The risk profiling is really, really important. My one piece of advice to every organization is don't panic. And don't think you've got to do it all yesterday, because that doesn't lead to real change. What you're looking for is a long-term strategy. So find out where you think those risks are. Take your time, ask the questions to really get to understand what's going on in that supply chain. And it might take you a year, it might take you 2 years, but start looking.
Is the government doing enough, do you think, to help this situation, particularly those people who get trafficked in and find themselves illegal immigrants, in effect? Are they doing enough?
No. Well, that's my personal opinion. There is a real conflict between, obviously, the Home Office and organisations like the GLAA, the Gangmasters Labour Abuse Authority. And I have been in lots of meetings where there is a genuine tension between them, because we're looking to export. But at the same time, if you come in and are if you're smuggled in, you're not inherently trafficked, you're smuggled in. That's a slightly different thing from trafficking. But as soon as you come into the UK, you're illegal, so you are vulnerable. And that's where there is a genuine tension between people who want to make sure these people are protected and not exploited, and obviously the immigration policy where it's about shipping you back to the country that you came from. So it is a really difficult tension. And do I think they're doing enough? Probably not. Prosecuting is really slow, and victim support is unfortunately not good enough. But that's my opinion.
You're an expert in procurement. Is this something that's, you may not be being it now, but you are certainly going to be asked in the future, what are you doing?
Without a doubt. So if any of you have got government contracts that you're working towards, even if you're bedded into the supply chain, be aware and have a look at the government's modern slavery web statement. Public procurement is now basically under the Modern Slavery Act. It never used to be. So I've already worked with lots of organisations like the LGA, like TfL, who were looking to really dive into their supply chain and understand where those risks sit. I would also say the other pressure, even if it isn't government and it's coming from private funding, is things called the ESGs, the environmental social governance requirements that are coming in. That's also starting to see funding being asked the questions, and it's not just labour, it's materials too. So getting ahead of the curve is a good idea, because it will come, and it's coming quicker than I thought it would do.
One of the viewers today has made a note that actually there's a storyline on the Archers at the moment about modern slavery. So Once it gets into those areas, then it does become much more. I'm afraid we're out of time, Helen.
No
Thank
problem.
you very much. That really was a fascinating topic, very interesting. We'll do some more on this if we may in our webinar program. But all I can say now is thank you very much. And again, apologies for the technical hiccup earlier.
Don't worry, it's been a pleasure.
Right.
And thank you for everybody who stayed with us. So have a good rest of your conference.
Thank you very much. And time for lunch. And we'll see you again at 2 o'clock.
Thank you.